What is up, guys? This is my 1988 Yugo GV. And yes, don't want to brag too much, but this is the same car that is on the Yugo Wikipedia page, like the actual same car. So, GV, what does that stand for? Great value. This is a Yugo Great Value. It's kind of joked as, I guess, the Lumen, if you will, of the car industry. Definitely made fun of a lot. Not going to get into that too much. Over in Serbia, it is categorized as a legend, if you will, or in some parts of the former Yugoslavia as well. And I'm not going to do too much of a big review on this car. I just want to use it, I guess, for comparison. I would strongly recommend, if you want a good review of this, Doug DeMuro did a fantastic one, and there's no way I could beat that, so I'm not even going to touch it. But anyway, this is my 1988 Yugo. And I will definitely say, as long as you do regular maintenance on this thing, it's actually somewhat reliable, and I'm kind of surprised, and I don't want to say somewhat disappointed. I was thinking I was going to buy the most unreliable car there was, and actually that's not necessarily the case. So, we have a 1.1 liter, as you can see in the sticker here, 1100 cc, basically a Fiat engine. And there is a big, let me show you around here, sticker letting you know where it's from, made in Yugoslavia, right there. A little tiny radiator. Of course, like any old Fiat car, you gotta have the spare tire right in front of the firewall. I don't necessarily know how safe that is, but anyway, I digress. Now let's get a look at the interior here. So basically we have a 1.1 liter making something around 50 horsepower. Pretty plain Jane interior, a 4-speed manual transmission. Not a little bit longer shifts, not too bad. Everything's pretty simple. Came with a stock cassette player, pretty typical of the time period. Does not have a glove box. That is right. This Yugo does not have a glove box. Neither did any of them, as far as I'm aware. See that right there. But basically pretty simple. Manual windows. Like I said, pretty plain Jane. Can move the seats up with this lever. That's your back seat. And that's pretty much it. And yes, this thing is tiny. I will post a picture of how ridiculous tiny it is compared to normal American cars. This is a hatchback, so there is a trunk. Show that back here. This is where all the luggage is stored. This is the back hatch. Pretty simple. And it closes just like that. Now, that is pretty much it. That is the Yugo, the famed Yugo. This car has had a lot of issues. The biggest issue that I can think of off the top of my head, if you do decide to buy them, was the timing belts like to snap at around 50,000 miles. And the big issue with this, if you know anything about mechanics, this is an interference engine. So basically, if the timing belt snaps, and you're talking about bent valves, you might have piston issues, valves running into pistons, be the cheapest car, at least in the modern era, that was ever sold. In fact, a lot of times dealerships would have offers where if you bought a normal car, you could get a Yugo for free. A lot of people didn't care to do maintenance on them just because it was so cheap. So that is a big issue with these. Like I said, if you actually follow the maintenance guide, this has about 58,000 miles on it, and the timing belt was changed at 50,000 miles, like recommended. So again, if you buy one of these, they're actually somewhat surprisingly reliable. I haven't really had any issues with mine. I think some minor speedometer issues, but you'll have that with any older car. It is carbureted. This is a carbureted engine. It is a little cold-blooded, as you can guess by the small engine size. But I haven't really had any issues with it. It runs, like I said, somewhat reliably. I don't know if it's OBD1 or if it doesn't. I would imagine it would be OBD1. Don't quote me on that, though. But, yeah, it's pretty much the famed Yugo. A little interesting fact here. Nameplate over in Yugoslavia, these were created by a factory called Zastava, which for any of you gun collectors out there, you'll realize Zastava is also the main arms producer of Yugoslavia. So basically what happened back in the day, they did such a good job at making weapons, the communist government was like, hey, you can make guns, why can't you make cars? So yes, this was made by a gun company. As far as I know, it's the only passenger vehicle that was ever made by a gun company. So a little interesting Yugo fact that you probably didn't know about. And this is my 1996 Fiat Panda that was just imported from Japan. Now, I guess the title of this video, is this a four-wheel drive Yugo, or is this the Italian Icon? Again, Doug DeMuro also did a video on this, surprisingly, so I'm not going to get into the details of it because I cannot do as good of a job as he can. I'll probably just link those in the description. You'll see the engine compartment looks very similar to that of the Yugo. Spare tire, also up front, also the same rim size and everything. Also has a 1.1 liter engine just like the Yugo. Which is a little deceptive. This is technically a different engine. It's a newer, because it's a 96. This is what is known as the Fiat Fire engine, somewhat more reliable. It is also fuel injected and a bit newer and more somewhat renowned than the Yugo. Let's look at the interior here. So first thing you'll see, it's kind of a weird, you have to push to open up the door. Again, this is a Fiat, this is not a Yugo. We also, if you can look at the shift pattern here, don't know if you can make that out in there. Yes, this is a 5-speed. It does have overdrive, so living in a luxury. It also, unlike the Yugo, has power steering and power windows. Again, the seat layout is pretty similar. Pull this latch. There is your back seats. Again, a bench in the back. And that is pretty much it. This also does have air conditioning, as you can see right there. You push this in and out, and that controls your air conditioning. So we have power steering, we have a 5-speed manual transmission, we have power windows, and we have air conditioning. So definitely a little bit more luxurious than the Yugo. But again, if you look at it, the outside, very similar. We also have the hatch in the back, right here. That also looks almost identical to the Yugo. Mud flaps, of course. You cannot have a Panda without mud flaps, which also have on them Fiat. And the biggest kicker of this entire vehicle, yes, it is four-wheel drive. Not all-wheel drive, it is four-wheel drive. So, let me open it up here. Let me set up the camera. There is a lever right here that when pulled puts you in four-wheel, and when pressed down puts you into two-wheel, which, yes, it's front-wheel. It is not rear-wheel going into four-wheel like pretty much every vehicle I've ever known. And I would love to get this up on a lift one day, but yes, there is a rear differential on this car. So, also, being a 96, a bit newer than the Yugo, which is only an 88, we have a full screen here, which shows different engine codes, seatbelt warnings, and all your basic things in normal cars. Again, being a Fiat that was imported from Japan, everything's in metric here. As you can see, the speedometers, kilometers an hour, liters for everything, Celsius for the temperature. Again, as an American, I'm not necessarily used to that, but as I pull this lever, there's a little logo, I don't know if you can make that out, with the rear differential with a light. Push that down, that logo goes away. Four-wheel drive is disengage. Engage, disengage. So basically, in a weird way, you could say that this is a four-wheel drive Yugo. What is up, guys? So this is my comparison, I guess, and kind of my thoughts about ownership of a Fiat Panda in the United States. This has never really This vehicle was never sold in the U.S. before, although it is a Fiat, which is a make which is sold in the U.S. And if you've been listening to my recent videos, I've kind of been withholding, I guess, the vehicle that I imported from Japan. Well, I imported a 1996 Fiat Panda. So, I needed a winter vehicle. I live in Michigan. We have very icy roads, and I was looking at vehicles, and again, I want something manual just because I believe they're more fun to drive. Something kind of quirky, good gas mileage as well. And a few articles popped up basically with the Fiat Panda, and before you know it, I was hooked on them. So here's one article here. Does the U.S. need the next Fiat Panda? This is, by the way, a very popular car in Europe, and a lot of my audience, if you do live in Western Europe, it's like, dude, why are you even making a video on this thing? Well, in America, they are not so common. Here is another interesting article that I have read. They say the Fiat Panda 4x4 isn't worth importing. They are dead wrong. And if you look at it, the first thing that popped out of my head is, holy crap, this thing looks like a Yugo. And as I showed earlier in the video, I do own a Yugo. I've owned it for a few years now. I guess it was always kind of my dream car when Doug DeMuro dropped that one video talking about how garbage it was. And on top of that, it is the only Eastern Bloc car that has officially been sold in the U.S. But as of now, as far as I'm aware, it's really the only passenger car from communist government or an Eastern Bloc government that has broke into the United States market. So given, I guess, the character of my channel, I definitely wanted to have one. I own one, and they're actually somewhat reliable as long as you take care of them. But the Fiat Panda is very similar to the Yugo. When I was over in Europe, I'll probably attach a few pictures here of when I went to Serbia and kind of drove through. I did a little bit of auto tourism, if you will. Rented out a new Fiat Panda, which, by the way, way they name them, MK1, MK2, MK3, in case you're ever on any forums or anything. This was, I believe, an MK3, the newest generation, and it looks nothing at all like the Panda that I have right now. But after driving one of them around the Balkans, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro, wanted to hit Bosnia and Macedonia and Albania too, but unfortunately did not have time for that. I knew I had to have one, and I ended up importing one somewhat thereafter. The big draw to this thing, yes, it is four-wheel drive. I don't know. I want to get it up on a lift. I haven't necessarily done the research on how it works, but it has a rear differential. It's usually in front-wheel drive when it's not engaged. So to me, it's perfect because, again, you're driving down a salted road, put it in front-wheel drive. As soon as the road starts getting gnarly, and you can literally do it while you're driving, pull up the lever, bam, you're in four-wheel drive. You're not wasting unnecessary gas mileage like you would be in an all-wheel drive vehicle. So that's kind of the reason I chose, I guess, a Panda over something like a Subaru. Plus, with a Subaru, you'd have the Boxer engine. Things are a lot more difficult to get to, where a Panda, that would not be the case. Maintenance. I guess the entire purpose of this video is to kind of compare the Yugo as well as the Panda. Which one is a better option? They both look fairly similar. I'm just going to say out front, the Panda is a Fiat, therefore it's going to be more reliable. If you have not seen my dirty secret about Eastern Bloc cars video, I strongly recommend you do. I will also link that down in the description. These cars are both basically related, but the Fiat just has more reliable parts. And when I bought my Panda, when I imported it in from Japan, I do not think, which I also made a video on how I did that, I do not believe I mentioned in the video it came with a timing belt and a water pump in the back seat. So I was kind of paranoid, again, like I brought up in the Yugo section of this video. If 1.1 liter engine, I know it's a newer engine, but it's still, I would imagine, similar based. If it's interference, I don't want to blow up my engine, especially given the fact I'm getting up to like 95,000 kilometers. You can convert that to whatever the miles is. I don't want to blow anything, especially when I just paid this much money to import it in. So I had the timing belt done, and a local shop in the U.S. was actually able to do it. They said they were able to find information on it. Yes, it was never sold in the U.S., but it is a Fiat, and there are tons of Fiats in the U.S., so it is a related car, and they were able to find enough information that they were able to do it. Maybe in the future I'll probably just end up doing that myself so I can show you a video, but at the time I didn't really have enough time to do so. So yes, maintenance-wise, these aren't necessarily too bad. I will also say the Yugo, As far as the Yugo is concerned, they were sold in the U.S. officially, so if you go to an AutoZone or something and say Yugo, it would be on their list. While with the Panda, that is not the case, unfortunately. So might be somewhat easier. And the cool thing about the Yugo, and I brought this up in a few videos, is a lot of parts if you buy them. And yes, there is a official Yugo Parts website. We are the only factory authorized Yugo Parts dealer in the U.S. YugoParts.com. A lot of parts, you can either at least buy them from this website, and you'll see this is AC, for example, which you could get AC as an option. Mine does not have it, as it is just a GV, which is like the base model. Most of these parts they do have in stock. A couple on them have Inquire, so they might not have it. Or let's go back to the main part menu. Let's say engine parts, engine, transmission, cooling system, crankshaft, pistons. Let's say you need some mounts, and again, they have them in stock here, so you can buy them. So yes, getting parts for Yugo is not necessarily too bad. It's not like with Russian vehicles right now. Again, also made a video on that. With sanctions, that is a lot more difficult. So Yugo parts aren't necessarily too bad. I will say the one issue with Yugo parts, as far as I'm aware, though, a lot of like body parts are a lot more difficult to get to. And the reason why I think Yugo parts are somewhat easier is because they're literally just Fiat parts. So a lot of these parts are just repackaged. Fiat parts were a lot of the body parts. Like if you want an actual Yugo logo, obviously that's not a Fiat part. It's a lot more difficult to get to, and a lot of the stuff is only in like Serbian or Croatian. And I do strongly recommend, if you're getting any of these cars, there are a ton of forums, like Yugo, for example. There is a Yugo Facebook group. I would recommend, if you're looking for that type of stuff, or if you're interested in getting a Yugo, don't overpay. Go to the Facebook group. There's Yugos for sale there all the time. There's Yugo parts for sale there all the time. A lot of it, weird body stuff, logos and whatnot, signs that you might not be able to find online at all, or unless you speak Serbian or something. A lot of these sites, unfortunately, that's all the only language they're in. As far as the Panda is concerned, part-wise, it is a little bit difficult. Again, I guess I'm used to Russian vehicles, so it's not that difficult. They are available. They're in Europe. They made the Fiat Panda, the MK1, the original version, up until 95 in Britain. After 95, they kind of discontinued them until the second generation of the Panda came out. So keep in mind, when you do buy a Panda, anything 95 downwards is going to be a little bit easier for you. I would recommend, I think like 92, 93 or something, they changed up the engine to make it more reliable. They put the Fire engine in there. I would recommend probably 94, 95-ish. Try to get one of those later models, because you'll have again, you can legally import those in the States, or old enough. The engine and transmission, everything's going to be a little bit newer, a little more reliable. Plus, they sold them in Britain. And the reason I bring that up is you can find these parts in English. You can search up for the parts in English. You don't need to know Italian. You don't need to know Japanese. Like I said, I imported mine from Japan, but unfortunately 96 to 2004, they were only sold in certain countries, and as far as I'm aware, they were not sold in any English-speaking countries, which kind of sucks. I've already had to try to get a few parts, and I will say, in my opinion, the easiest way to get parts, especially browsing through like Italian eBay or something. I've tried to reach out to some Italian parts companies. They told me they refused to ship to the U.S., which is unfortunate. And I was at least able to get a part number. Using the part number, again, this is a Fiat. A lot of the parts are interchangeable. It's not like most of them are specific to the Panda. If you go to this site, Midwest Bayless, there's a lot of antique. This is just one of, I'm sure, a few antique Fiat stores, online stores that are in the U.S. And again, this also sells Yugo parts, so there you go. I guess you can get Yugo parts as well. I was able to use the part numbers, and this literally buy the parts that I needed instead of getting them from Europe, which is a pain in the butt because it takes like a few weeks. It has to go through customs. Shipping is just absolutely ridiculous. Sometimes you're paying $30, $40 just for like a little spring or something. This is out of Ohio. I live in Michigan. Shipping took like 2 days, and it cost like $3. So a lot of the parts that you need, they are in the States. Again, you will not see Panda on this list. I'm sure they come off of maybe the 128, the Beta, some other sort of Fiat cars. But again, if you know the part number, these are Fiats. the part numbers for a lot of these parts are the exact same. So I do recommend, again, part-wise, it's really not too difficult. You should find most of what you need for both these vehicles. Now, as far as ratings go, would I recommend anybody here get a Yugo or a Panda? Well, that all depends on what you're looking for. So if you want a good daily driver, if you live down south, for example, I would not say a Yugo is that bad. Mileage-wise, I would be careful. Unfortunately, I have not seen a lot of Yugos with high mileage. But in my opinion, that's just because the owners didn't take care of them. I would be very strict with how I take care of it. Again, like I said, timing belt, for example, be very, don't mess around with that. If it snaps, it's not worth. The Yugo is like a $3,000-$4,000 car. It's not necessarily worth putting a new engine in, so that's why a lot of them got dumped. And they are becoming more and more rare. Investment-wise, it might be a good investment to have a Yugo. It's kind of cool, too, a piece of history. Everybody knows about the Yugo pretty much. Drivability, it doesn't have power steering, but again, it is so light that you don't really need power steering. Again, AC is an option, so if you do live down south, I guess you could technically have one with AC or install AC, which, again, I lived in Georgia for 13 years. I would not drive a car down there unless it had AC. Michigan's a bit of a different story. The problem with both these cars, in my opinion, is they're both so thin. They're little tin cans. In the winter, the salt's going to eat them right up. My Panda, I'm sure you saw in the video, there's a few little rust spots here and there, nothing too major. But I try to at least put it through the car wash once a week, try to take care of it, keep the salt off of it. Yugo doesn't even touch the snow at all. I don't want it to. It's too rare of a car, and frankly, I just don't want to risk it. So the Yugo, again, is front-wheel drive. Yes, you can go highway speeds with it. I have gone 70, 75 with it without issues. It does not have a tack, I believe. I guess you don't really need one, but seems to handle pretty fine. You can tell it's kind of pushing to the limit, going 70, 75, but it is able to do so, unlike my Buhanka. As far as the Panda goes, same thing. I mean, drivability is very similar to that of the Yugo. Everything feels very similar to the Yugo. Would I recommend getting one? Again, it depends what you're looking for. If you want something four-wheel drive, again, it's a Fiat. You can get parts. Local shops are able to work on it. I'm sure if you went to a Fiat dealership, again, they might not be necessarily the happiest with you, but they would be able to get stuff and work on it if you needed them to. Then, yeah, I would strongly recommend it. I definitely think there is a gap in the U.S. market right now where a lot of these lower horsepower, everybody wants big, 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 or even hybrids and stuff, which, again, if you looked at the cost of changing a battery in a hybrid, it's absolutely ridiculous. In fact, the Panda that I rented out in Serbia was a hybrid, and it did me good, don't get me wrong, but you're opening up a can of worms with that. Granted, you do get really good mileage. So if you want a vehicle that gets mileage in 30s, high 20s, somewhat reliable, you can get parts for it somewhat easily. It's odd. I almost guarantee you almost nobody's probably seen one in real life, at least in the U.S., unless they've been in Europe for a bit. Sticks out a bit, and it's 4x4. This thing is amazing in the snow. I've driven a lot of 4x4 vehicles, especially trucks and stuff in the snow, and this far surpasses it. So if you want a really good winter vehicle, or just an off-road vehicle in general, I would strongly recommend a Panda. As this article is titled, does the U.S. need the next Fiat Panda? I actually say it would. It's fun to drive around. Like I said, mine has a 5-speed, which is pretty fun to drive. It definitely needs that overdrive. It has surprisingly a decent amount of space. I do grocery shopping, can fill in the back pretty easily. So I would definitely recommend a Panda over a Yugo. To me, it's like all the cool things about a Yugo, but more practical. Now, obviously, you're going to be getting a Yugo for, probably around half, a third the price, half the price. Definitely, the Yugo is obviously a more exotic car. Again, a Panda is still exotic in the States at least, but they both have their pros and cons. And honestly, I guess to answer the question, the title of this video, is the Panda just a 4x4 Yugo, or is it an Italian legend or an Italian icon? I would definitely say the Italian legend, the Italian icon. I know it is known as being very basic, simple, bare bones. In my opinion, it has everything you need, and it doesn't have anything you don't need. I don't want too many extra features. Again, 4-wheel drive, really good on mileage, gets around, reliable, like everything that I'm looking for. It's fun to drive. in a vehicle, that's what the Panda is. So in my opinion, the Italian Legend, again, the Yugo was kind of a ripoff of a Fiat to begin with. Now, again, the bodies both share a lot of similarities. Again, the tire sizes, the windshields, the way the windows are put on, like very similar, if not identical, and a lot of people get them mixed up. So take that as what you will. If I have to give a rating of both cars, I would probably give the Yugo maybe about a 7 or an 8, probably about a 7. Again, it is a lot more bare bones, but it is the only like Eastern Bloc car that I've really cracked through the U.S. car market. Everybody knows about them. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you can make your own assumptions. And they're pretty fun to drive. Don't get me wrong. As far as the Panda goes, I would honestly probably give the Panda about a 9. I would recommend buying one. I definitely think that's something that could take over the U.S. if it was marketed properly. And I think the four-wheel drive is really nice, especially with the weather we get here, especially here in the Midwest. It's really nice to have four-wheel drive. And even if you don't need the four-wheel drive, it goes back into front-wheel drive, which is really nice. And again, it's a Fiat, so it's getting parts and whatnot is not as difficult as a Yugo could be. So yeah, I would strongly recommend a Panda. That is kind of my little review of the Panda, I guess, if you will. And thank you for watching.